right, let's look at what the Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi has had to say during that media briefing with Dr. Fikile Vilakazi, who is with the University of the Western Cape. Dr. Vilakazi, thank you for making time for us this afternoon. You were listening to the traditional Prime Minister of the Zulu royal family, and he's dismissing as false reports that he has vacated that position or plans to do so. Why do you think it was important for him to come out and state publicly that those media reports are false?
Good afternoon, Clement, and to viewers at home. What a history lesson from the Prime Minister of AmaZulu. I mean, clearly in his passionate speech and a little bit of anger there, he is trying to convince citizens of South Africa and the Zulu nation that he is the Prime Minister first and foremost, and he's got the power and the authority to come and dispel what he is, what seems to be myths around his position within Ingonyama Trust and his relationship to the king. And I mean, you can see, Clement, that the Prime Minister is adamant about his role, as the Prime Minister of AmaZulu, which is a role that he inherited. I mean, he tells us the whole story from Princess Makoko and the marriage and so on, and basically insisting that he has got the authority and he's got the right to do this. Even when people were saying, why is it that you feel the need to come and tell the nation in this manner? That in itself is wrong. He is saying that is utter, ignorance on the part of the people. In fact, he says that is incorrect. He has got the right and the responsibility to do that. Clement, as we know, the issue of traditional leadership in South Africa is one that is a thorn in the nation, since CODESA, since the negotiations, and I think he alludes to that. We know that this is an issue that has resulted to blood in the country, right? In the 80s, in the early 70s, as South Africa was also emerging towards democracy during CODESA, the way these conversations, and one of the things that were troubling the ANC in my reading of the situation, of course, is the role that traditional leadership has played during the apartheid regime. We know, for instance, that the South African Act of 1909 and Yobantu Administration Act of 1951, these were pieces of legislation that were used by the apartheid regime to give certain powers to the monarchy, and enabled the monarchy to serve the intentions and the objectives of the apartheid institution. And this is something that has troubled the African National Congress as negotiations were happening. And part of the negotiation of Ingonyama Trust, fellow South Africans, was one of the thorny issues, because they wanted a portion of land in KwaZulu-Natal. And he is right to say it remains a sensitive matter. The question and issues related to Ingonyama Trust, we know that have resulted into a lot of people, particularly women in KwaZulu-Natal, losing their homesteads, losing their land of their ancestors and ancestresses because of the powers that were given to Ingonyama Trust to own certain segments of land, hectares, thousands of hectares of land. And of course, the issue then of who becomes the chairperson, even a trustee of Ingonyama Trust, as we well know, South Africans, that the late Ingonyama Nkosi Ukutuzolithini was the sole trustee of Ingonyama Trust, and of course the now Ingonyama King Misuzulu Gazolithini is now the trustee, and of course it's got authority to employ people and appoint people into this position. And the Prince is trying to say, I have been a custodian of this role and this responsibility over time. And the contestation here, and the problem that I have been reading from the side of the ruling party, is that the institution of the monarchy over time, as much as we understand is one of our traditional institutions as African people, it has been used. It has been used as a token of violence. It has been used as a token of counter-revolution, as I've mentioned, during apartheid. And of course, there's skepticism around that. Emerging to democracy, Chapter 12 of the Constitution still makes provision to say, municipalities and provinces can actually decide how the traditional leadership plays its role in issues of traditional affairs of a province, of a municipality.
Yeah.
So democracy does make provision for that. But what is actually an issue here also, as we are negotiating these things, Clement, is that the institution of traditional leadership is also patriarchal, right? It runs through the patrilineal or patrilineage, which is leadership through the father. And through masculinities. And South Africans are saying these institutions have proven to be undemocratic in their practices, right? And those are the things that are troubling. And of course, in the context of Ingonyama Trust and issues of succession, issues of democratization, one of the deepest concerns generally of the nation, not just KwaZulu-Natal, is to say, can we have succession? The Honorable Prince really is late in terms of age. He says it himself that some of us are young and so on. But there's those issues that I think citizens are worried about, to say, can we have succession also within the traditional leadership system?
Yes. No, you're right. And it's always a case with Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, taking us down that memory lane and giving us the history lesson. But when we talk about the Ingonyama Trust, I mean, he stated there that I am the author and creator of the Ingonyama Trust. How much influence does he have on who becomes, for instance, the chairperson? Because now there are concerns around Jacob Mnisi and why he has, quote-unquote, rejected the offer to be the chair of the Ingonyama Trust and the reasons that he's been given. It appeared to me during that briefing that Prince Buthelezi seems to have some concerns about how these issues have been dealt with, or who has been or is being considered for this position. He says he'll be raising those issues in the next meeting. He won't discuss them publicly. Does he have a lot of say, having always been a key stakeholder when it comes to this trust?
Well, I mean, if you look at his role within the system that we call KwaZulu monarchy and the Zulu kingdom, he does have influence. He has always had that influence, to Nkosi Ugutu Zwelithini, and he does hold still that influence with Nkosi uMisuzulu, So he does play that influential role, which is why he's saying to all of us, this is a private conversation of the Zulu nation. I do not wish you to be part of it. There are sensitive matters, even issues that may be of national security interest. So as we all know, South Africans, this conversation at some point in the story of our nation resulted in bloodshed. And we have to say this. So he's trying to avoid those things, but clearly there is that influence. We've seen even in the manner that Nkosi uMisuzulu, was brought into authority. There were challenges there. He played an influential role, which he considers himself to be the sole custodian of that particular role, and he wants to do that in that upcoming meeting. Yeah,
he spoke of attempts to drive the wedge between him and the king, and he says these unjust attacks are because of his position. Is there a reason why there are possibly, as he suggests, some people out there who don't want him to have this close proximity to the king?
The thing is, part of it is about land ownership. We know that Ingonyama Trust has evolved to be a place that charges landowners rent, right? So they are making income from Ingonyama Trust, something that never should have happened, of course, according to the eyes of the citizens. So even if he's saying this is not a paying job, we do know that Ingonyama Trust does receive incomes, by insisting that people must pay rent for the land that they occupy. So who knows, perhaps he does benefit indirectly to that, and not necessarily monetarily, but in terms of investment. We know that land is investment, Clement and fellow South Africans. And I think it's very, very sensitive to saying whoever then holds that position of chairpersonship, even the person that becomes the trustee of the Ingonyama Trust, does not need to compromise that particular role, which he clearly states this is what was at the thorny table of CODESA. Right? Even to be honest with you, even during CODESA South Africans, he is correct, Prime Minister. Inkatha Freedom Party actually did not want to be part of this democracy because of this matter. And he doesn't want to see this being compromised at this point. And I think he feels like he's the only person, given the knowledge and the wisdom that he carries of the story over time, that he can, influence the king to be able to see this and ensure that this role is not relinquished in some form to somebody that may compromise that positionality, which has placed the Inkatha Freedom Party in particular, but also the Zulu monarchy into this position of owning this land permanently, by the way, because you know that if traditional leadership is something that comes through lineage, and it's a permanent position until one dies, which is what is troubling our democracy and the African National Congress to say, how then does that become constitutional? So the contestation is that even as these negotiations are happening, can they happen in the context of respect for the Constitution? Can they happen in the context of advancing constitutional democracy so that the role of the monarchy in KwaZulu-Natal does not compromise that, even in hard times when we are saying land must be given back to the people? Ingonyama Trust is very, very key to those conversations. So I think it's sensitive around those matters, that something may be lost if he doesn't play an influential role in that regard.
Yeah. Dr. Fikile Vilakazi from the University of the Western Cape, thank you for making time for us. Still to come.